So the long-awaited and probably my favorite section so far of the Gohan character review is finally here. We are at the Cell Saga portion of my Gohan review, and this is a lot of fans' favorite portion of Gohan's journey as a character. So I am excited to get into this because I have a lot to say. Now, I'm not going to start at the very beginning of the Cell Saga because it doesn't really pertain that much to Gohan's character. So instead, just for the sake of getting to the relevant information in this video, I'm going to start whenever Gohan and Goku start training together in the time chamber. The first scene I want to call attention to is Goku trying to teach Gohan Super Saiyan in the time chamber. What Goku is telling Gohan is essentially to imagine that you're in a scenario that you normally would be when you get these massive rage boosts. Now, something really important to keep in mind here is that this is very, very close to what Gohan has used in the past to power up and face foes before. He would essentially get into these situations where he has a trigger very similar to Super Saiyan, but in this case, when he feels a trigger, he actually transforms into a Super Saiyan. Now, what is the main difference between what Gohan did back then and what Gohan does now? Well, a lot of it is, like Toriyama has said, S-cells. A lot of it is Gohan's power level at the time, because you have to be a certain amount of strength in order to be able to become a Super Saiyan. But the most defining factor that separates this instance of Gohan becoming a Super Saiyan and just experiencing these rage boosts is the fact that the emotional shock that they feel when they become a Super Saiyan seems to be much more intense than a lot of the emotional shocks that Gohan has had in the past. Because what happens when you become a Super Saiyan is you go into a suspended state of rage. So essentially, rather than Gohan getting a temporary boost where he just feels rage in the moment, sort of like, an adrenaline boost, he actually ends up being put into a suspended state of that rage. And that is very, very, very important. Now, the first thing I want to call attention to in terms of Goku's teachings and why they're so important is that they are there to be a counterbalance to Gohan's personality and his development as he becomes a Super Saiyan and is coming off the tail end of his training under the warrior King Piccolo. Now, I've talked extensively in my previous videos about the effect that Piccolo had on Gohan, and of course, he essentially made him into a warrior. He made him to where he can use his power to essentially take care of issues without these emotional rage boosts sometimes, because he's trained him to use his power, all the time through training and maintaining himself and subjecting Gohan to these do-or-die situations where he either acts or his friends or someone else is going to be killed. And over time, Gohan has become a hardened individual in comparison to who he was before. One of the biggest things that people overlook about Gohan is that this is not necessarily a good thing. The change that Gohan is going through here is not necessarily a good thing. And Goku actually, he catches on to this in a genius way, that Gohan becoming this hardened warrior is counterproductive to him because it prevents him from being able to take advantage of the same personality traits and who he was as an individual prior, which is essentially a pacifist who really cares about everyone around him and is not necessarily numb to the effects of battle, but is actually very, very sensitive to it. And over time, the more you subject Gohan to this effect of becoming a stronger warrior, the harder it is for him to experience these rage boosts. And that's very, very important moving forward with Gohan's character, because that aspect of Gohan's personality is derived from Goku. Now, I've talked in my previous videos about how Gohan was born with a Buddha nature, and that is essentially what I'm talking about here. So after Gohan and Goku achieve Super Saiyan, Goku essentially tells Gohan, we need to get rid of this unstable feeling that we have while we're in Super Saiyan, so that way not only can we essentially use it as if it's our base form, and in Gohan's case, he can maybe even surpass it. Essentially what's happening here is Goku and Gohan are imbuing their actual nature as individuals, their Buddha nature, into their Super Saiyan forms. And you'll notice that after Gohan and Goku make their Super Saiyan forms, their base forms, not only do their personalities change and they're much more reminiscent of who they are in their base form, but it also makes them ridiculously strong and puts Gohan in a position to where he can essentially feel the same trigger that he feels in base form that allows him to, rage out and get these boosts in Super Saiyan. So this is essentially Goku establishing to us that Gohan's personality, his nature as an individual, is extremely important for him to be able to implement his inner power, his inner potential. If he loses himself, if he loses who he actually is and becomes too hardened as a person, he will no longer be able to tap into what makes him exceptional as a warrior, and that is his ability to experience these emotional shocks due to the fact that he cares about life so much and he hasn't been hardened by war, essentially. And the greatest example of this, outside of this whole dynamic between Goku and Gohan, is Future Gohan. Future Gohan is essentially a grizzled warrior who has been through hell. And as a result, he is numb in comparison to who he was before. And as a result, he could never surpass Super Saiyan in the same way as Gohan, because he had lost his nature as an individual due to the fact that he had been hardened. That is why it was so important in this case for Goku to help Gohan tap into his true nature. That way he can take advantage of his nature and eventually experience a rage boost that would send him to the next level of power. Another genius aspect of Goku's interaction with Gohan is the fact that he chooses to spend time with him and basically take it easy after they've mastered Super Saiyan and just enjoy life. And a lot of people don't really catch on to why he chooses to do this with Gohan, but it's because he understands that Gohan's greatest motivation is his love of life. So the fact that he's choosing to let Gohan relax and enjoy his time with Goku, Chi-Chi, spend time out in the wilderness, and just basically like have family activities and enjoy each other's company, that was a great way to enhance his love of his life and the life of everyone around him. So I think that's something a lot of people don't really catch on to in this arc, and so I really wanted to call attention to it because it really does play a huge part in what happens going forward whenever Gohan finally does end up facing Cell. Now, we all know that the Cell Saga is very, very heavily influenced, and the Android Saga, from the Terminator films. We all know this. But unless you're like really familiar with the films themselves, there are a lot of references that you won't catch on to. For example, this interaction between Gohan and Android 16. Gohan's love of life and Android 16 realizing, why that's important and expressing it the way he does is a direct reference to the conversation at the end of Terminator 2 when the Terminator decides to sacrifice himself for the fate of mankind. And I just think that's a super cool way for Toriyama to play on that. And also Gohan's love of all different types of life, including artificial life. The fact that Gohan cared for artificial life really goes to show the bounds and the depths of his consideration for other living beings. So when Gohan faces Cell prior to all this with Android 16, his pacifist nature is at the surface. He tells Cell that he should stop fighting, that the fight is pointless, and Cell remarks that that's ridiculous and that Cell is here to have fun and Gohan is here to save the Earth. Gohan tells Cell point blank that he doesn't like to fight like his father and that he doesn't want to kill anyone, and not even Cell. And this speaks to Gohan's compassion for all life. Gohan knows that in the past, he's gone berserk and lost himself to his rage, and he knows his father is counting on that rage to take Cell down, and that's why it was so important for this aspect of Gohan's nature to maintain intact, because the entire reason that he is capable of having these rage boosts is because of how much he cares about life in general, is due to the fact that he is he's essentially a Buddha. This is what a Buddha is. If you've ever wondered what a Buddha is, Gohan's pacifism, the way he cares about all life, that's the Buddhist philosophy, is caring about all life in this way. And what's really interesting about Cell, and I'll just go into Cell for just a second because it is very important in reference to Gohan's character, the inspiration for Cell. Now, every time I read a Dragon Ball arc, I look for the inspiration that could have been derived from Journey to the West, and I always find something. I always find something cool. And the main character of Journey to the West, the person that Sun Wukong protected on the Journey to the West, Tripitaka, which is also partially inspired Gohan, as I mentioned in my previous videos, he was known as the Golden Cicada. And Cell is a cicada-themed villain. We see that whenever you see his shell that he hatches from at the beginning of the arc. And the Golden Cicada's entire thing was that he reincarnated over and over and over again until he could reach perfection. Now, I don't know about you, but that sounds an awful lot like what's going on here with Cell. He's essentially, I mean, it makes the super perfect Cell scene so much cooler when you take that into consideration, because he literally is reborn. It's a lot of this stuff is just symbolism for the cycle of reincarnation. That Dragon Ball is loaded with that, from the rebirth of planets and the rebirth of certain characters. It is loaded with that. And most people genuinely, they just don't understand the genius of the scene with 16 and Cell and, Gohan, and how all this stuff connects. Because it's like, it's not only is it a cool mix of Journey to the West and Terminator, but it's also 16 knows exactly how to make Gohan understand why his rage is necessary, right? Gohan loves all life. All life. 16 uses that same love to play on a contradiction in Gohan's philosophy, which is the contradiction in a pacifist philosophy from a philosophical standpoint. This is discussed a lot. How can you truly care about everything in existence if you aren't willing to fight for it? Get angry for it. Gohan must get angry. He must become violent to preserve the peace and pacifism that he holds dear. And this is an amazing philosophical critique on the part of Toriyama. This is the happy medium between the ideas of Darwinism, Buddhism, Taoism. This is why warrior monks can exist, because of this idea. Darwinism and Buddhism particularly would normally be two opposite and contradictory ideas. One enforces peace, one ensures violence as a necessity for survival. And in this scene, Toriyama illustrates to us his personal philosophy regarding both, and that is actually reflected in Journey to the West. Buddhism highlights the importance of intent, but when it comes to survival, the need to survive is not good nor evil. It's an amoral thing. And this created a philosophical loophole and common ground between these two polar opposite philosophies of Buddhism and Darwinism. And that's what essentially is happening here with Gohan. And that's why the fact that he is the product of both Goku and Piccolo, that makes him like a perfect hybrid, like the balance between the two ideas between each character. Now, remember when I said that Super Saiyan is essentially it's a suspended state of rage, right? Well, that is what happens to Gohan when he goes Super Saiyan 2. And it's funny because the way Gohan is characterized here is more similar to the Monkey King than almost any other characterization like in the series, in terms of like the perfect balance between like his consideration for life and his just savage nature when it comes to wiping out people who are in his way. But it's, that whole thing is not necessarily, that is not framed in a good light here, and it's not framed in a good light in Journey to the West, because not only did Gohan lose himself to his rage to the point it corrupted his intentions, which were to make Cell suffer rather than kill him for their survival, he did not have the principles of martial arts like Goku to keep his anger at bay. Remember, Roshi told Goku that if you were ever to face a foe who would endanger the earth, to take them out in one blow, because there's no sense in making them suffer or doing things like that for personal reasons. The whole idea is avoiding personal intent. And Goku is trying to tell Gohan, hey, you need to chill out and just get the job done. But Gohan has fallen victim to his anger. And anger is a basic survival instinct, as I have discussed before. And the more ingrained you get into your anger will actually make you feel justified in your actions. It causes you to actually believe that you're justified in the things you're doing as it becomes more intense. And that's essentially what Gohan is experiencing here. And he's lost that nature that he had before, that he had sort of ingrained into his Super Saiyan form. And he's now in a suspended state of rage that is even more intense than the suspended state of rage that he had in the original Super Saiyan transformation. Now, one of the biggest differences between this scene and Goku versus Frieza on Namek is that Goku practices Budo, like earthen martial arts, which again purifies his intent and causes him to have mercy on Frieza. Gohan never learned these principles or these ideas, so That, in combination with his intense rage, ultimately gets the best of him, which costs him his father and almost the Earth itself. But once Gohan focuses on the Earth's survival, he's successful, and that's very important here. Now, this is where I want to essentially just highlight the importance of Goku and Piccolo's teachings and how impactful they are and important they are to the overall narrative of this arc. Because Goku, his role is to essentially restore Gohan back to his true nature, the nature that he inherited from his father. But what is Piccolo's role? Why is he so important? Well, once Gohan loses himself to his emotions, he needs to fight as a warrior rather than a emotional child. And that is Piccolo's role. Piccolo can help Gohan actually fight as a warrior after he's transformed into one of these emotion-based transformations. And Goku is responsible for his nature as an individual that allows him to have these rage boosts over and over again. So both are extremely important in terms of their influence on Gohan. Piccolo's influence on Gohan as a warrior is what he needs to control himself when he gets these rage boosts, and Goku's influence is what he needs to be able to have these rage boosts. And that's why it's so important that each character have their effect on him in this arc, because that's essentially Gohan finding his balance. That's essentially what that is. Now, as I said earlier, Gohan he's a pacifist by nature, and I expanded on the origins of Cell. And what's really interesting about this is that Gohan, he studies insects. Cell is an insect-themed character, and Buddha became Buddha, or awakened, through his love of insects and different bugs. So I just thought that was a really interesting concept, and that's definitely something that Toriyama is playing on here when it comes to the relationship between Gohan and Cell. So essentially what's happening here is Gohan, like Goku in the Namek Saga, has become the victorious fighting Buddha. The term fighting Buddha reflects Sun Wukong's martial prowess and his willingness to use force when necessary to defend the innocent and defeat evil. However, as a Buddha, he also embodies the wisdom and compassion, and his use of force is always tempered by his desire to help others and promote justice. So essentially, this is Gohan becoming Sun Wukong, but not just Sun Wukong the victorious fighting Buddha. Now, at first, he exhibits character traits that are sort of the negative character traits that Sun Wukong exhibits in his story, which is kind of the purpose of him losing himself to his rage, to show us narratively the difference between Gohan when he's kind of like the evil version of Wukong and the victorious fighting Buddha. But what you see at the end of the arc when he takes down Cell, that is essentially Toriyama referencing the victorious fighting Buddha and what makes Sun Wukong special as a Buddha and his personal form of enlightenment. Sun Wukong, as the victorious fighting Buddha, sort of represents a unique interpretation of Buddhist philosophy that emphasizes the use of force to protect the innocent and defeat evil. This interpretation is sometimes referred to as Buddhism with a sword. Now, traditional Buddhist teachings emphasize nonviolence and the avoidance of harm to all sentient beings, which is why Gohan was behaving the way he was. But the victorious fighting Buddha embodies a more complex approach to the violence. It recognizes that sometimes force is necessary to prevent greater harm and protect those who are defenseless. However, he also understands the limitations and the potential negative consequences of violence. And so he strives to use them only as a last resort. That's essentially what Sun Wukong's personal enlightenment is. So that reflects Goku's character, that reflects Gohan's character. Like a lot of these, a lot of Dragon Ball is centered around this idea specifically. Most of Dragon Ball is centered around this idea specifically because this idea is also taught in martial arts. This idea is also very important in martial arts. You don't use lethal force unless you absolutely have to. And Sun Wukong had a huge impact on martial arts as a result. I mean, he himself was a martial artist, and he's a huge figure in media. And this Dragon Ball Z, this arc, as cool as it is, and as a huge fan as we all are, as far as it being just a sci-fi show with martial arts and cool fighting and amazing animation and art, it really is a synthesis of martial prowess and Buddhist compassion, like Sun Wukong, which is I love that. I love that the whole series itself is a play on Sun Wukong's personal philosophy, and that Buddhism with a sword philosophy. Now, keep in mind that philosophy is not universally accepted within Buddhist philosophy, but that is the philosophy that Toriyama has chosen to play on here. And it also reflects Budo, which is what Master Roshi taught Goku in the original Dragon Ball. And that's why, despite the fact that Goku is a very merciful person, he was still encouraging Gohan to take out Cell and do what he needs to get the job done, because that's essentially, when it comes to just fighting for your survival, that's an amoral stance to take in combat, and as a result, there's no impure intent there, and so you can get away with that in Buddhism with a sword philosophy. And so that is sort of a loophole in the idea that you can't use violence within the context of Buddhist philosophy. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.